There comes a point in every soul's journey when the pain inflicted by others becomes more than just circumstantial. It becomes a pattern. You notice it in your relationships, in your family, in friendships, even at work. The disappointment repeats, and it starts to feel like people keep wounding you the same way over and over. The names change, the settings shift, but the emotional injury feels hauntingly familiar. And if you've ever asked yourself, why does this keep happening? To me, this message is for you. One of the most painful truths we must confront is the role we play in our own emotional suffering, not because we consciously invite harm, but because we unconsciously permit it. When people hurt us, our first instinct is to blame them. And often that blame is deserved. People lie, people betray, people disappear when we need them most. But beneath those surface-level experiences lies something deeper, something far more difficult to face, the reality that we often mistake silent hope for boundaries, and in doing so, we unknowingly grant others the power to wound us. Most people do not grow up learning how to communicate their emotional needs. Instead, we are taught to be nice, to be agreeable, to make others comfortable. We associate love with sacrifice. We confuse peace with compliance. We think that if we're kind enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, eventually people will notice, appreciate, and treat us well. But life doesn't work that way. Hope is not a contract, and people do not automatically give back what you so freely give away. When love lacks clarity, it becomes a breeding ground for disappointment. Imagine a woman named Layla. She is warm, generous, dependable, the kind of friend or partner everyone leans on. She's the one who picks up the phone at midnight, who covers shifts for co-workers without complaint, who forgives the boyfriend who always shows up late, emotionally distant, half present. Layla tells herself that she's doing this out of love. That loyalty is her virtue. But deep inside, she is exhausted. She feels unseen, and worst of all, she feels used. What she doesn't realize is that she has been trading her authenticity for belonging. Her boundaries haven't been disrespected, they've been non-existent, because she never actually stated them. She hoped others would just know what not to do. She assumed love would imply mutual care. But in the absence of clearly defined limits, hope is just a silent agreement to be hurt again. Real boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are not ultimatums. They are expressions of self-respect, of knowing who you are and what you will no longer tolerate. They do not require anger. They do not demand that others agree. They simply draw a line and say, "This is where I end, and you begin." They are not about teaching others a lesson. They are about protecting your inner peace. And yet, for many people, the very idea of setting a boundary feels terrifying because it threatens their core fear, abandonment. What if saying no makes them leave? What if standing up for myself causes conflict? What if being honest about my needs makes me unlovable? These questions haunt the hearts of those who have learned to survive by pleasing others. And so they keep bending, keep giving, keep breaking themselves into pieces, hoping someone somewhere will finally make them whole. But the wholeness they seek cannot be given by others. It can only be restored by the self. Let's take another story. David, a quiet and thoughtful man who had spent most of his adult life in relationships where he felt emotionally starved. His partners weren't cruel, but they were distant. When conflicts arose, he avoided them. When he needed support, he stayed silent. He prided himself on being easygoing, not realizing that what he called calm was actually fear in disguise. After years of being overlooked, he began to see a pattern, not in others but in himself. He realized he had never told anyone what he truly needed. He had never let himself be fully known. And in that absence of truth, others projected what they wanted onto him. He wasn't being loved, he was being tolerated. And that realization broke him open. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you'll never be hurt again, but it means that when pain comes, you will know it wasn't because you abandoned yourself. You will stand in your own integrity, even if it means losing people who benefited from your silence. That is the deepest courage, choosing yourself not in a selfish way, but in a sacred one. When we begin to set boundaries, something remarkable happens. The people who truly see us who value our presence and not just our utility, they stay, they adjust, they grow with us. But the ones who leave, they reveal the truth. They were only ever comfortable with our compliance, not our authenticity. And while losing those connections can be painful, it is also clarifying, because it makes room for something more honest, more mutual, more whole. Many people believe that boundaries are a rejection of others, but in truth they are a return to self. They are not about shutting the world out, they are about letting the right people in. People who don't need to be convinced of your worth. People who respect your no as much as your yes. People who meet you where you are, not where it's convenient for them. And the more you live in alignment with your own boundaries, the more magnetic you become. Not because you are trying to impress, but because you are no longer trying to be someone you're not. It is not your job to make everyone comfortable. It is not your responsibility to carry the emotional burdens of those who refuse to carry their own. It is not noble to abandon yourself for the sake of being liked. It is tragic, because every time you choose others over your truth, you teach your soul that it doesn't matter, that it can wait, that it must earn its right to exist, and that is the wound that keeps repeating. But you are not here to be a placeholder for someone else's comfort. You are not here to be a mirror for someone else's brokenness. You are here to be whole, to speak truth, to protect what is sacred within you, even if it means walking alone for a while. Because on the other side of that aloneness is a life that reflects your worth, not your wounds. And so the truth remains, people will continue to hurt you as long as you continue to abandon your boundaries. Not because they are all cruel, but because most people are walking through the world unconscious of how their behavior affects others. Your job is not to fix that. Your job is to become conscious of your own sacred limits and to honor them, as if your life depends on it, because it does. Another hard truth is this: most people are not rejecting you. They are rejecting the version of you they have created in their minds, the one they assumed you would continue to be. When you begin to grow, to wake up, to demand more from life, you become uncomfortable for those who were only ever comfortable with your dysfunction. And so the more aligned you become with your truth, the more you will notice this strange phenomenon. People you once called friends, family, even lovers, may begin to pull away. They might accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of acting better than. But what they are really saying is, I don't know how to relate to the person you're becoming. This is the price of healing. Your old world starts to fall away. And that's why most people never fully step into the next version of themselves, because they cannot bear the grief of outgrowing the relationships that once defined them. We all want to evolve, but few of us are prepared for the emotional consequences of becoming new. Growth is not a straight line. It's a spiral of loss and rebirth, over and over again. And the most painful part of that cycle is realizing that love in its familiar form might not survive your transformation. Consider someone like Amir, a man who grew up in a household where emotional needs were shamed and vulnerability was weakness. For years he molded himself into a role. Dependable, logical, stoic. It won him respect, promotions, even admiration, but not intimacy, not real connection. When he finally began therapy in his 30s, something cracked open in him. He started noticing how much of his life had been lived on autopilot, how many of his relationships were rooted in performance rather than presence. He started speaking up, sharing feelings, asking for depth, but something strange began to happen. The people closest to him, his colleagues, his old friends, even his siblings, began to pull away. Some laughed it off when he got serious. Others changed the subject when he shared his struggles. A few stopped replying altogether. At first he thought he'd done something wrong, that he was too much, too emotional, too intense. But over time, he realized the truth. His transformation was triggering in those who had not yet faced themselves. His growth made their stagnation harder to ignore. People don't always hurt you out of cruelty. Sometimes they hurt you because your evolution reminds them of their own suppression, and rather than confront that inner discomfort, they retreat, deflect, or project. They label you difficult, dramatic, unstable. But what you really are is awake, and that is threatening to anyone still invested in their own denial. You have to understand, We all live in psychological contracts with those around us. Even if nothing is said aloud, there are invisible agreements. You don't show me your pain, and I won't show you mine. You laugh at my jokes, and I'll never question your drinking. You stay who you've always been, and I'll never have to change. These unspoken rules maintain the illusion of peace, but it is a false peace, bought at the cost of your authenticity. And when you begin to break those contracts by becoming more real, more expressive, more you, some people will feel betrayed. But it is not your job to remain small, so others can feel secure in their illusions. This is where many people get stuck. They confuse rejection with punishment. They think, if people are walking away, I must be doing something wrong. But here's the truth. Rejection is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a form of divine redirection. It is the universe clearing space for those who can meet you where you are going, not just where you've been. You must learn to hold the grief of this transition, to allow the sorrow of being misunderstood without rushing to fix it, to let the empty spaces form even when they echo. Because if you fill them too quickly, with old patterns, old people, old versions of yourself, you'll only delay the deeper healing that's trying to take root. There's a paradox at the heart of personal transformation. The more whole you become, the lonelier it can feel at first. Not because you are unlovable, but because few people have learned how to love someone who no longer needs to be rescued or controlled. The more conscious you become, the less willing you are to tolerate manipulation dressed as care, control disguised as concern. And that clarity can be isolating. But loneliness is not the same as wrongness. It is the quiet space where your soul stretches into new shape. It is the silence before the music changes. And if you stay faithful to your truth, if you keep walking, even when it hurts, you will begin to attract a new kind of resonance. People who don't just tolerate your depth but celebrate it. People who meet your vulnerability with their own. People who see your healing not as a threat, but as an invitation to grow beside you. And so if people are pulling away as you rise, let them. If they recoil as you open, bless them and release them. Not from a place of superiority, but from a place of compassion. Everyone is on their own path, and not everyone is ready to face the truths you've had to face. Their rejection says more about their readiness than your worth. The most dangerous thing you can do in the aftermath of someone's withdrawal is to shrink yourself to win them back, because that's how the cycle begins again. You abandon your truth to avoid abandonment. You silence your voice to preserve connection, but that connection, once based on suppression, will only ever breed resentment. The real connection you seek is one that doesn't require you to fracture yourself. People will continue to hurt you if you keep returning to the same dynamics, hoping for a different outcome. Healing is not just about forgiving the past. It is about refusing to repeat it. And that requires clarity, boundaries, grief, courage, the willingness to walk through the loneliness that truth sometimes demands. Let those who cannot hold your growth fall away. Let those who misunderstand your healing misunderstand. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to become the most honest version of yourself. And the more you honor that, the more you will find the ones who are not intimidated by your light, but inspired by it. One of the most painful truths we must come to terms with is that people will treat us only as well as we require them to. Not as well as we deserve, not as well as we hope, but only to the extent that we draw a firm line in the sand and say, this is where I end, and this is where you begin. Without this line, this boundary, we are clay in the hands of others, molded by their moods, their needs, and their projections. And that is how people end up endlessly hurt, not because they are weak, but because they have never been taught that their needs, their space, their soul are sacred. The tragedy is that many of us were never shown what healthy boundaries look like. We grew up in homes where love was conditional, where silence was rewarded, where our worth depended on how easy we were to manage. Maybe we had to be the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who absorbed everyone else's chaos so the family could stay functional. And in doing that, we learned a dangerous belief, that love means sacrifice, that closeness means saying yes when everything in you is screaming no, that being a good person means tolerating what quietly destroys you, But this isn't love. This is self-abandonment masquerading as loyalty. And over time, it creates a hollow kind of pain, the kind where your life looks fine on the outside, but inside you feel invisible. Resentment builds, exhaustion takes over, and still, you keep showing up, hoping someone will notice you're bleeding, even as you smile. Real boundaries are not about building walls. They are about drawing maps that say, here is how to treat me if you want to be close to me. Here is what is mine to carry and what is yours. Here is how I will honor myself, even if it disappoints you. But setting those boundaries is terrifying, especially if your earliest experiences taught you that love is something that can be lost if you're too honest, that if you say no, you'll be left, that if you stand up for yourself, you'll be alone. So instead, many people choose the familiar pain. They tolerate disrespect, they overextend, they people-please, not because they're weak, but because they're scared. Scared that the moment they start asking for more, they'll lose everything. Yet the paradox is this: the moment you begin protecting your energy, you do lose things, but only the things that were never really safe to begin with. You lose false peace. You lose manipulative connections. You lose relationships that were built on the version of you who didn't know how to speak up. And in that space, something miraculous begins to grow. A different kind of strength. One that says, I will no longer make myself smaller so others can feel more comfortable. I will no longer explain away bad behavior just to avoid confrontation. I am allowed to exist fully, and the people who are meant for me will not be threatened by that. Consider Layla, a woman who spent decades tolerating microaggressions and passive-aggressive comments from her in-laws, all under the guise of keeping the peace. Every holiday was a performance. She swallowed comments about her cooking, her parenting, even her body, until one day something inside her cracked. She realized she was modeling to her daughter what it means to be silent in the face of disrespect. And that was the breaking point. She decided, trembling, that the next time a boundary was crossed she would speak, and she did. Her voice shook, her heart pounded, but she looked her mother-in-law in the eye and said, "That comment was not okay. If it happens again, we won't be attending future gatherings." There was shock, of course, some backlash. But there was also something else. Space. Space for honesty, for growth, for self-respect. The first time you hold a boundary, it feels like you're choosing conflict. But what you're actually doing is choosing clarity, and clarity is what sets you free. It tells you exactly where you stand and exactly who stands with you. The deeper issue is this: many of us tie our self-worth to how much we can endure. We think, if I can just handle this one more time, maybe they'll change. If I just stay kind, stay quiet, stay flexible, they'll see how good I am. But this is the trap. You cannot love someone into respecting you. You cannot bleed yourself, dry and expect others to fill you. The only way to end the cycle of being hurt is to decide, finally, that your healing is not up for negotiation. And yes, people may leave when you draw a line, but the ones who truly love you will rise to meet it. They will learn. They will adjust. They will grow with you. Because real love is not about comfort. It's about mutual evolution. So many people remain trapped in dynamics that chip away at their soul, not because they don't want freedom, but because they haven't yet believed they're worthy of it. And this is the moment where everything begins to change. When you say, I am done making myself easy to swallow, I'm done shrinking to fit into spaces that don't see me, that's when the cycle breaks. That's when the hurt begins to heal. Let them be uncomfortable with your boundaries. Let them call you selfish. Let them say you've changed, because the truth is, you have. You've changed from someone who tolerates harm into someone who protects their peace. And there is no higher form of self-love than that.